So let's walk through an example of the Fed's open market operations. So we know that the Fed can buy or sell securities from banks. So in this example, let's say that they are going to buy. So here's the T account of the banking system. This is the entire banking system in billions. We've got assets and we've got liabilities. And remember, they have to equal each other. So for assets, they've got 100 billion in required reserves, 650 in outstanding loans, and 50 in securities. And then they have 800 in deposits. So if we know that they have 800 billion in deposits and 100 billion in required reserves, can we figure out what is the required reserve ratio? And of course the answer is yes. So if the required reserves are 100 and the deposits are 800, and we know that the required reserve ratio is required reserves over deposits, 100 over 800, or 1 over 8, if you drop those common zeros, is 0.125, and you're going to move that decimal over 2, or you can times this number by 100 to give you the percentage, and it's 12.5, okay? So this equation is one that you're going to want to know. So required reserves over deposits equal the required reserve ratio. And as long as you know any two of these numbers, then you just fill in what you know and you solve for what you don't know. All right. So we did not know what the required reserve ratio was, but we did know required reserves and deposits 1 over 8, 12.5 is the required reserve ratio. So if the Fed buys $10 billion in bonds from banks, and remember they had 50 billion, so now they're going to buy 10 billion. So now they've still got that 800 in deposits, they've got the 100 that's required, so this stays constant. They still have the loans. Now they've got 40 as securities and 10 is excess reserves, because the Fed has taken $10 billion of those securities away. They've purchased them, and in exchange, they've given the bank the $10 billion. So they bought those securities. So the securities go down by 10, the cash goes up, and now that cash is excess reserves. So if the Fed is buying, then what do you think that means? Do you think that means they want more money out there? They're going for easy money? Or do you think that they want less money? And the correct answer is that they want more money out there because they are buying, so they are injecting cash into the banking system, which will be loaned out, remember, over and over and over, if you recall our example. So this $10 billion will be multiplied with the multiplier effect, and it will stimulate the economy. All right, so this is the example. The Fed will get those securities and the bank will get the money. So banks now have $10 billion in excess reserves that they can loan out. So now there's going to be more money in the economy. So this is good, but it also has a negative aspect. If there's more money out there in the economy, what's going to happen to inflation? And the answer is it's going to go up. And that's what happened with COVID and the stimulus package. The government just pumped so much money into the economy by sending people checks that it led to inflation. So there was more money chasing the same amount of goods. That leads to inflation. So how much money will be created by this $10 billion purchase by the Fed? Well, we go back to our equations and we can look at the potential deposit creation model. Change in excess reserves, which we know is 10 billion, times 1 over the required reserve ratio, and we know that that is 12.5%. So you just fill in the blanks. 10 billion times 1 over 0.125 is 10 billion times 8, or $80 billion. So that means that banks can increase the money supply by a maximum of $80 billion, as a result of the Fed purchase of $10 billion in securities. So the final T account in the banking system will look like this. The banks had 800 in deposits. Now they've got these new deposits, right? This is what's been created, the 80 billion. So those have been deposited in banks. According to our model, remember we say that all new money is immediately deposited back into the banking system. So now we've got $880 billion in liability. We know that the required reserve ratio is 12.5%. So that means that 12.5% times 880 is 110. That is the required reserve ratio. There are no excess reserves. $730 in loans. And where did we get that? Okay, so we have the $650 that we originally had, and then the 80 that was newly created money that we loaned out. So that is where we got the 730. And then we have the 40 of securities left over. All right. So if the Fed buys bonds, reserves and the money supply go up. If the Fed sells bonds, reserves and money supply go down. So bond prices, I'm going to do this in the next segment.